So I asked maybe 10, 15 different people, just randomly with no context, out of the blue. I said, "What do you think of coffee?" And most of them said, "Well, it's an addiction." A couple of them said, "Well, it's sort of a routine." And then a couple people said it's kind of like a ritual. After that, they really didn't have much to say. It just kind of ended with it's an addiction. It's good. I like coffee, whatever. And then that was pretty much it. Which is strange if you think about it, because coffee's been around since the 1500s or 1400s or something. I mean, it's been around for a long time, probably even before that. So it's such a big part of human culture, yet we don't really think about it or talk about it, or I don't know. I mean, we just kind of accept it as part of our daily lives. And so I think we're just going to sit here and talk about coffee just for the hell of it and drink coffee. So,
Yeah. It's funny
yeah.
you mentioned that too, because if you think about alcohol and the way people sometimes identify with alcohol, uh, people have opinions on it. Some people have their entire identity built around alcohol. This tends to be maybe a younger person, early 20s, but they'll have all these photos of them drinking and like, yeah, we're gonna drink. I like drinking. There's just this, and I'm not really condoning that, but people really get behind alcohol as this thing that they talk about and they make parties oriented around alcohol. But you don't see that with coffee. People are like, yeah, I guess some people do. There's our t-shirts and whatnot, but it's certainly not taken to the same level, even though it's one of the most widely used drugs across humanity.
I mean, yeah, not the same level, but you see those, like, Pinterest girls in their cozy sweaters
I guess
with the
that's true.
sunrise and an open window and their favorite book, and they're holding their coffee and it's steaming or whatever. So I mean, it represents some kind of peacefulness, or I mean, there's it's
Yeah,
definitely in culture. Um,
you're right. I wasn't really thinking about the Pinterest angle and that kind of stuff. You're right. There is
oh,
a lot of that.
yeah, and the productivity angle where they
Hmm.
always got a cup of coffee. I don't know. I mean, it is an addiction, right? But when people call it an addiction, I'm always just it has the connotation. Addiction has the connotation of, ruining your life for a substance. When I think of addiction, I think of someone, just high on crack, or, addicted to cocaine or heroin, or something. And
Yeah.
then you're just sitting there sipping coffee. So it's not quite the same. Like, you wouldn't have the Pinterest girls, in their cozy sweater with the sunrise in the window, holding their favorite book in one hand and a tray of cocaine in the other, right? Like, it's maybe some, but it's just like, yeah, it's an addiction, and you will definitely feel that if you go a day without coffee and you're addicted to it. But in terms of any other type of drug, it's really not the same at all.
Well,
Um,
it's funny you say that because I lately have been thinking about trying to cut out caffeine for a little while, like for a few weeks or a month.
yeah.
I want to see if it might help me sleep better and might help me be a little bit calmer during the day. And I am someone who I was trying to figure this out. I'm not sure how long it's been, but it's at least 15 years. Like of the range in my head, the minimum is 15 years of how long it's been since I've gone even a single day without a significant dose of caffeine through coffee. I doesn't matter traveling, camping, nothing. Always I have made sure that I have coffee. That is just it's like food and water. So
Same here.
I've yeah, and I've thought about trying to go off of caffeine for a little while just to see, and I'm afraid of the withdrawal. Like I don't want the headaches and to feel the way that I know I'll feel that I remember from 15 plus years ago. So there's definitely a real addiction factor there and that I'm afraid to not use it.
Well, I completely agree. I have also thought about, okay, well, what what does actually change? Do you become, more focused or more productive if you aren't a coffee drinker? I've just been curious about that. So I wouldn't mind giving up coffee sometime in the future for a period of time to, figure out what the effects actually are. But everything I've watched on it, I'm sure you've seen some of those videos of people giving up coffee for 30 days or whatever. And I don't know. Some people are real gung ho about it, but like all my favorite people, the people I look up to, most of them drink coffee all the time. It doesn't seem to have that negative of an effect on people,
Yeah.
In terms of productivity or focus or whatever. I mean, it can be a nuisance, and everyone drinks it in different amounts. And,
Right.
I don't know.
Well, I love coffee. I mean, so going back to your addiction thing, I'm it's probably worth talking about minor addictions and how it, if you'd asked me outside of this context, I'd be like, no, addictions are terrible. You really want to avoid an addiction anywhere. It's, by its nature, it's something that you do that's not, it's sort of against your will in a way, or there's a compulsion towards it that is beyond just your normal decision making process. But with coffee, I know I'm addicted to it, and I feel very okay about that. Like I feel like it's fine. I enjoy it. I think it's helpful to me. It helps me. I think it really does help me focus. But I don't know. There's other. You could sort of pose that same question towards other addictions. Like obviously, people are addicted to using their phones sometimes, and you know, for me, I do a lot of gaming. I'm sure I have some level or low level of addiction to that. Just doing it habitually. I don't know.
Well,
There's a lot of things that sort of fall into a similar category, and I'm not sure how I feel about all of them.
I wake up every morning and, one of the first things I do is grab a cup of coffee and then go sit down. And it makes me want to get out of bed and start the day. It
Hmm.
makes me happier to just have the coffee, or more at peace or something. It's just really nice to have the coffee in the morning. It's like my most treasured time of the morning.
Hmm.
Um, and if I'm addicted to that and I hang all other routines on that, I don't see it being all that bad. Now, there's definitely other sides to it. Sometimes if I wake up late, you're grabbing coffee and rushing out the door. You're
Right.
not exactly enjoying it. You're just, God, I don't want to feel awful for the day. So let me just, uh, chug some coffee real quick. And yeah, it's not always a super pleasant experience, but I kind of wanted to talk about like just what what is the feeling of coffee? Why do
Yeah.
we drink it? I mean, if you look up videos online, you'll get, and I was skimming through some of the top, coffee videos today, and almost every single one is, did you know coffee doesn't actually give you energy? It blocks adenosine, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, I don't care. And
Also,
so
yes,
you just
everyone
get,
knows that.
yeah, which I guess is interesting, but it's just like, okay, none of this is really all that interesting to me. And I was drinking a cup of coffee. I'm on like my third cup of coffee today. Uh, but
You do
I was
seem a
drinking
little
it.
fidgety.
All right, I'll try to calm down a little bit. But I was drinking a cup of coffee earlier today, for research, and I'm sitting outside. The weather is perfect, and it's a little bit cooler, and I'm just holding this hot cup of coffee, and the weather's super nice, and it's just wow, this is really nice. I don't know how to
Hmm.
describe it exactly, but there's something about the pacing of how you drink a nice cup of coffee, where at first it's a little too hot, so you're just sipping it, and then it gets a little cooler, so you drink it a little
Yeah.
faster, but you don't drink it too fast. There's this pacing involved with it. And if you think about lots of different activities, humans seem to be more relaxed in uh, a paced scenario, or something. If you think about like having a conversation with someone. They Good conversations seem to happen on walks where you're sort of on this, you're doing a light activity and it has this pacing for it. Or if you're driving in a car and you're
Hmm.
actually on like a nice road, not bumper to bumper traffic or something.
Right.
But even then, I mean, a car kind of keeps you in one place, a walk keeps you in one place, a cup of coffee shared with somebody
Hmm.
sort of makes the decision of, okay, we're going to be here for a certain amount of time.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point that it forces you to drink it slow. Like you have to appreciate a cup of coffee. You can't just pound it and be done.
Well, you can. It's
So,
just awful.
I mean, people will pound a beer. Drinking alcohol fast is a whole hobby of some people. I know a guy who can down a beer in, I swear, less than 2 seconds. It just like opens his throat and it goes down. You can't do that
Um,
with coffee. It'll hurt a lot.
yeah.
But that's an interesting point that you have to, or it sort of forces this slow, methodical process of even just drinking a cup of coffee. Like you're describing you sitting down and having to kind of be still and you're observing the world and drinking this cup of coffee slowly. That's how it, I mean, I usually work with coffee. Usually I wake up, go somewhere and then get my coffee and I settle into the work that I'm going to do. And that's easily by far the most productive and focused part of the day for me is that 2 hour cycle. And a major part of that, I've actually been wondering how much of that is due to the coffee part. But you, I mean, you can sort of drink coffee on the go, but it sucks. Like you're drinking in the car and it's always
Yeah,
like
with the
sloshes
thermos.
and burns you and I hate it. That's to me not the greatest use of coffee, but usually it's hot. You have to be careful with it. It takes a long time to drink. So you are kind of sitting down and having to just progress through the cup of coffee slowly.
When I used to smoke cigarettes, I think it's the exact same thing. I mean, a
Really?
cigarette, you light it, you take a drag. And I mean, there's a pacing to it, and it's
Hmm.
going to last a certain amount of time, and you know how it's going to make you feel. I mean, there's a predictability to it. And I think that's an aspect of smoking that people really like. I still smoke cigars sometimes, and it's the same thing. I mean, if you're going to
Yeah.
smoke a cigar, if it's a nice cigar, you sit down and you commit to a certain amount of time, and there's a
Yeah.
pacing that goes along with it. And it's just, you're sort of committed to this frame of mind, and it can be that way with coffee. It's not always
Hmm.
that way. Many times I just drink it to drink
Right.
it. But even just earlier today, I'm noticing, oh yeah, like I actually really enjoy the feel of the mug. If it's
Hmm.
a really nice temperature, there's so many tactile things about it. There's the look, and or the look of the mug, the look of the coffee, the way it smells, there's just so much about it. I also watch some coffee ASMR videos, just because I'm trying to wrap my head around, like, what do we love about coffee so much? And I'm watching these videos, and just the sound of the grinder, seeing the beans, all ground up, and then the water pouring, and then the foam, it's just,
Yeah.
I don't know why I like this, but I like it.
Hmm.
And apparently a lot of other people do too. So,
That was one thing that I thought was pretty interesting is so orange juice as an example is, as far as I've seen, not something that people get terribly passionate about. So it's good, but for the most part, you go to the store, you buy it, you drink it. That's pretty much the end. There's not much beyond that. And maybe there's a few different kinds, and maybe you like some kind beyond the others, but it doesn't go that far. Alcohol, like say beer, is not like that at all. I mean, people are crazy about beer, and a big part of the reason is that there's so much possibility. I mean, a beer is a fermented drink, which makes it a very complicated thing to begin with. You have all different strains of yeast and that can be used. You can be fermenting all different kinds of things with different grains and different methods of extracting. There's different sort of flavorings you could put in there. Hops are its own universe. and then how you brew it, how long, and in what. And there's just so many variables with beer that you can dedicate your entire life to exploring that and trying to create certain things. And you can create a beer that is unlike any other beer on earth. Like, it's this incredible depth and craft and science behind beer. And it kind of took a while to evolve, and coffee took a similar trajectory here too. But beer started out, well, at least in this country, like, it was kind of industrialized, and you have the big manufacturers who are making, Budweiser and stuff, and that's kind of dominates the scene. But then eventually it starts to get it to smaller and smaller stuff, and you have, craft breweries, and then you even have micro breweries, and even what they're calling nano breweries, which is a fancy name for like a guy who bought a Mr. Beer keg and is brewing in his closet. But it kind of branched out into all these different areas and little subcultures and beer. But the sort of downside with beer, I think, is that all of that craft and depth and interest is really only available to the brewer. You, as a consumer, you pretty much just go buy a beer and you drink it, and that's it. Like, there's nothing that you do or change to that beer. You're just having to go around and find interesting beers, which is really fun. And there's, tons of potential there, but that's kind of it. Coffee, on the other hand, to me, coffee is similar in beer. Maybe not quite as complicated because you aren't fermenting it, but there's all different beans from all over the world. You can roast it in different ways to different levels. You can brew it in all different ways, but a lot of that is available to the consumer. I was trying to count in my head, and I couldn't figure it out how many different coffee makers that I have. I mean, I have a crappy blade grinder, a conical burr grinder. I have a hand mill with a ceramic burr grinder. Those are just the grinders. I have a French press, an AeroPress, a clever pour over thingy, a siphon brewer, a drip brewer, a Spanish coffee maker, which is I think a percolator. All of that stuff and that's just the brewing and grinding. I was into roasting for a while. You can do that in the oven. You could buy green coffee and roast it on a pan. The best way is to actually buy a popcorn popper, which sounds really weird, but it works perfectly. Popcorn popper has this little bowl, and it blows hot air up through the bottom of that bowl thing. And it's designed to pop popcorn kernels, but you can fill it with coffee beans, and you just have to kind of hold it and like shake it a little bit so they circulate. But it'll roast coffee perfectly. And you can't do a ton of it, but you can roast coffee like that. So there's all this stuff that is available to you as just a normal individual. You don't have to rely on somebody else to do all the interesting things. You have this ability to do all of this interesting stuff yourself and brew coffee and do coffee in a million different ways. And that, I think, is something really special about coffee that I don't think is there for that many other things.
That's interesting. I never got real into the creation of coffee, but I do enjoy just hearing the coffee being made.
Yeah.
I really enjoy that. The house fills with the aroma of coffee, and it's just amazing.
I mean, I say all that, and I have this fairly cheap, I probably got it from Alibaba or something. It's all the translation to English is bad, but it's this big drip maker. It has a hopper on top, a conical burr grinder, and then it just makes drip coffee. And you set the grind. Once you get it dialed in, it just does the same thing every time. It grinds it up right there. And it's so good that I just never bother with the siphon brewer and firing up a, butane burner to do all that nonsense.
You were doing that. You were doing all the siphon stuff at your old apartment, right? I remember your whole kitchen was just weird coffee devices.
Yeah. Yeah, I had said before that I think people don't identify with coffee that much, but that's clearly wrong, and I'm even one of them. I think I was like, yes, I'm a coffee guy. Just to quickly describe a siphon brewer, because it's called different things and it might not be that familiar to people. Uh, a siphon brewer is you have this bowl. It's like it's spherical, like a ball of glass where you fill it with water. It's kind of held up on a stand, and underneath that you have a butane burner or sometimes an alcohol burner. Although don't use those; they're so crappy it barely works. But you use a butane burner. So there's this flame. It like heats up the bowl. It looks like you're making drugs, but the thing heats up the water in this bowl. And then once it starts to boil, it forces it up this glass tube. So there's this like, it looks like a goblet almost. There's this big glass cup with a tube running straight down, and you kind of mount that on top where that tube runs down into this glass bowl. So you boil the water. It's the steam starting to, build up in that bowl, like forces all the water up into the tube and into this big cup thing. And in the cup, there's this filter at the bottom, uh, and you put coffee in that cup thing. So the water gets forced up into the cup, and then it just mixes with the coffee grounds. You kind of stir it around a little bit, as the heat's there. You let it go for a minute or something. Then you cut the heat. The bowl cools down, and it pulls everything back down. Like as that steam condenses back, it drags the water back through this filter into that bowl. So essentially, you're boiling water, forcing it into this container with the coffee grounds. The coffee grounds just float in it, sort of like a French press, where you're just mixing the coffee grounds in the water, and then once it's done, it forces it back through the filter into this thing, and then you have coffee. It's super cool. Like it looks just really fancy, and there's fire and boiling water that's moving around, so it's just awesome looking. The problem is that it's a pain in the ass to clean. You just have to like disassemble the whole thing, and that to me is what made it less fun. And it's super fragile. I broke a couple before I like got it figured out, but it's really really cool. And the taste of the coffee I would describe almost the same as French press, because French press is almost the same process. Like you're just pouring hot water into grounds and like mixing it. You're not extracting it by a drip like through a little cup of coffee or a container filter of coffee. The grounds are mixing with the water, but it has a very fine filter, whereas a French press doesn't. It just has that metal mesh. So it winds up taking out a lot of the finer particulates. So it tastes like French press, but without that kind of gritty, like, there's still a little bit of coffee grounds in my coffee. To me, it's amazing. It's like
Yeah.
the best coffee, but it is a pain in the butt.
Well, it looks really cool.
It
Looks like a
does.
mad scientist or something. Um, okay, let's shift gears a little bit. So, I mean, I already kind of mentioned this, but uh, conversations seem to surround coffee, or coffee seems to be a part of good conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly, I've heard a bit about the old Parisian cafes, and I'm sure this happens everywhere, but Parisian cafe sounds so much cooler than American cafe or Starbucks. But
Yeah.
apparently back in the day, you know, authors, writers, musicians, artists, politicians, all kinds of important people would gather at these Parisian cafes and just sit there drinking coffee and talk all day long, all the time. And there were specific cafes like dedicated to that.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently some of them would accept drawings from artists as payment, and so the walls would just be covered with these drawings or poems or whatever.
Oh, that's cool.
And they took a lot of pride in that, and it became like, I don't know, just a big thing. Like Tolstoy and I think Picasso and just a bunch of those big name important people would sit there and talk all day long with their coffee. And I don't totally understand why that is. I mean, I think we already kind of mentioned some of the reasons. One is I think when you're drinking coffee, it gives you an excuse to sit somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
It gives you something to do, but it also makes you feel good. I mean, coffee just makes you feel good, and it's fun to drink, and but I remember we were talking about some, and I'm hoping you can fill in the gaps for me. But there was one study we had talked about where these different groups of people were injected with adrenaline, and then they were forced into a situation or something. I really hope you remember this, but they were put through some kind of situation, and then they all interpreted it in different ways. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
I don't remember it much better than you do. This was a study we were looking at, and they injected people with adrenaline, which is sketchy.
We're gonna leave out
yeah
ethics.
yeah
On it.
right. And then they had I think a test administrator. I'm gonna get some of the details wrong, but they put these people in different situations, and they had somebody administering a test, and they had this person either upset or like agitated, or they had this person like excited and really jazzed to be there type of thing. And they looked at how the people responded. And I think they had sort of a control group, or they weren't injected with adrenaline and whatever. Basically, the adrenaline would be interpreted however the context like caused them to interpret it. So if the person was upset, they would be upset and really upset and feel bad and panicky almost. And if it was excitement and this very positive thing, then they would feel excited and very positive. And this it lines up with your basic physiology, and that the difference between being anxious and, well, maybe not anxious. Anxious is a bit of a different thing, but like excited and just feeling on top of the world and really high energy versus being angry and agitated is a narrative part. It's the way your brain is interpreting what is happening, but the actual hormones are more or less the same. You're just getting adrenaline. You're getting this big spike of arousal and energy. That's what you're talking about,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Okay.
And for some reason, I'm remembering it was like they had a man and a woman or something, a bunch of them, and they had them like walk across a bridge together. Like they didn't know each other.
Yeah.
I'm sure I'm getting everything wrong, but whatever. It's just an example.
No, I know this one. I remember
Okay.
this one.
Explain.
The bridge one, I actually heard somebody talking about this recently, so I kind of cheated. But the basic idea was they had a bunch of, psych major, freshmen, something. They got all these people, dudes, heterosexual guys, and they had them walk across a bridge, and it was this really sketchy, rickety bridge, so it was very scary. And so they had this attractive female fake test administrator person meet them halfway across the bridge, like right in the very scary, over the chasm, and ask them a bunch of questions of just, hey, how are you feeling and whatever. And then, so that was half the group. And then the other half, they had them walk all the way across the bridge. And then once they were done and everything was safe, for that group, they had the administrator meet them and ask them the same question. So they were comparing what's the difference between them encountering this person at the scariest moment when they are up above the gorge or
At
not.
peak adrenaline.
Yeah, peak adrenaline. And they asked them all these questions later about, hey, do you think that this person finds you attractive? Did she seem really nice? Like, ask, questions like that. And everyone who encountered this person at the scary point, like, estimated her as being very interested in them. They, because of their own excitement and their own adrenaline levels, they interpreted this situation as like attraction, whereas it wasn't, and it was just down to that situation. Like the adrenaline wasn't even coming from the social situation, it was from something else, but this is how they interpreted it compared to the group that didn't have that. They were much less likely to think that this person was interested in them and whatnot.
Yeah. So that's what I was looking for.
Okay.
And maybe it's a bit of a stretch, but I don't really see how it could be too much of a stretch. But you're drinking coffee with someone and it gives you some adrenaline and,
Yeah.
energy or whatever, and you're feeling good. Wouldn't it be plausible that you would interpret the situation between the two of you or the group of friends or whatever as, I don't know, being an environment where you are accepted or, where you feel more comfortable or you connect more? I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
do you think that could be part of that?
I
It
think it's
just seems
almost
like,
certainly part of it because that seems to be a pretty simple observable feature of humans, and that we don't have these different buckets where we say, "Oh, I'm excited because I'm on a bridge, but oh, here's this person talking to me." That's a totally separate thing. Like we might
yeah,
cognitively have that, but in terms of the way we experience things emotionally and physically, that's just not there. The hormones are the hormones. If you have adrenaline, you have adrenaline. If it's because you're meeting somebody and you're really excited about them and you think that they're into you, that's one thing. It doesn't matter where it comes from though. Like your brain still gets it. So yeah, 100%. I think that has to be part of it. That the
yeah.
caffeine is doing something when you're sitting there talking to someone.
So your brain could be attributing the goodness from the coffee to the friendship or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Not that it's wrong. It's just, yeah, they're kind of connected, which I think is kind of cool. Um,
I mean, it's something you're doing intentionally. Whether you think
yeah,
about it in those terms, or not, it doesn't really matter. You're saying, "Hey, I want to go get a cup of coffee with you. Let's sit down and do that and talk to each other." Like you're trying to create an environment where it feels good. And we haven't even really touched on this, but the coffee shop aspect, you almost can't even separate that out of the
yeah,
coffee itself. You're not grabbing a cup of coffee in a dirty pot and sitting in the mud and talking. You're in a nice coffee, like you're in an environment that's designed around those ideas. And I personally, I don't know if you want to get into this yet, but there is this term called third place. Have you heard that? It's like a city planning term. It's basically just a way of referring to something that isn't your home, that would be first place, and it isn't your job, because that would be second place. It is a third place. It is somewhere that you can go that isn't one of those two things, and you go there for something other than home and work. And there aren't that many third places. There's a bar, which is a particular type of third place. I actually really like bars, not all of them, but certain ones. But I don't like drinking alcohol all that much. Like I'm usually happy to have one drink. I don't usually want to have more than that or more than two or something. So you have bars as a potential third place, but you also have coffee as a third place. And like you're saying, the environment around that is so different than alcohol. And there's really not much else. Like you can go to a tea shop. Uh, my experience with those has been that they are the height of pretentiousness. It might just be where I live, but I haven't really been into it. And there are not very many. You can go to a bar, you can go to a coffee shop, but there's not a whole lot else. You can go to a restaurant and eat, but you're mostly there to eat. You're not. It just doesn't have nearly the same experience as coffee does. I don't know. There's something
right.
really unique about what a coffee shop is fulfilling, and I mean it's built around coffee and caffeine, but it's pretty unlike anything else.
Well, it's also one of the few places that actually encourages you to just hang out.
Yeah,
You know, people want you to sit in a coffee shop. They don't want you to sit at a restaurant. I mean, you sit down, you eat your food, and then they bring you the bill, and they want you out so
that's
somebody else
true.
can fill the
Yeah,
table. But a coffee shop supports that. They want you to just stay there and keep buying drinks,
yeah.
and that makes it one of the few options if you're looking for a place like that. And you live in a much better place for coffee shops than I do. I mean, there are definitely coffee shops around, but I can't walk to any. My only option at work is Starbucks, but we go there a lot. But I used to go to coffee shops all the time, and I would sit there and write songs, or write lyrics to songs or whatever, or draw things, and I would spend. I used to mix music in coffee shops. I'd bring my MacBook and just kind of mix my songs and everything, and I would spend all day there. I loved it, and I would be doing that more now if I had the time. But
Not to brag, but in my neighborhood, which is not that big, it's basically 4 blocks by 4 blocks. So very easy to walk across the whole thing. But in this neighborhood, like not even crossing the street to, across the street from the neighborhood, there are there are 4 coffee shops, like just dedicated coffee shops in the neighborhood itself. There's a coffee cart that just opened, and then a cafe, which is more like a brunch place that you could go to get coffee. Like it almost passes a coffee shop. So basically 5.5 coffee shops in a 2-block radius of me. And that's discounting even just crossing the street, when there's a million more. So it's actually ridiculous how many coffee shops there are around me.
Yeah. Well, I hadn't really thought of it before, but there really isn't much like a coffee shop in terms of places you can hang out. You could go to a library, right, and hang out. But there's
Yeah.
nothing to drink there. They don't serve food really.
Right.
Maybe they have a crappy coffee maker, but you probably can't use it. There's nothing quite like a coffee shop.
Yeah.
And I guess that's why people go there.
I was reading how in London there was it was like Jonathan's coffee shop or something like that. But it turned into the London Stock Exchange because it was a coffee shop. People would go there to do coffee shop stuff, and businessmen would talk to each other, and they started selling shares from different companies and whatnot. And eventually that just morphed into the London Stock Exchange, which is pretty wild. Like it's hard to imagine a bar turning into a stock exchange. But a lot of people credit coffee and coffee shops as a major component of the Enlightenment, of people moving into the modern era and starting to pursue invention and everything. Because you go back far enough and people drank a lot of alcohol, a lot, in part because sanitation wasn't really there. We hadn't figured this out because we hadn't gone through the Enlightenment yet. So it was kind of dangerous to be drinking water all the time. You would drink alcohol because it's fermented and the fermenting kills stuff. But culture, like society, was just kind of based around alcohol, which is something that makes you relaxed, but it also slows your brain down. You aren't smarter when you drink alcohol, you're less smart. It does not have any of those properties of you
Right.
sitting there patiently focused with someone else and talking and having that excited, focused conversation. Coffee and coffee shops coming around started to like facilitate that, where people would go and they would sit there and they would talk all day about ideas and what they wanted to do.
I mean, that's what the fire is attributed, or they consider the fire as being, one of the biggest movements uh, in evolution. Is just coming together, sitting around a fire,
Yeah.
talking or communicating, however we did, and culture sort of builds around that. And then you get into more modern culture, and the fires disappear. And then
Yeah.
coffee comes in and replaces the fire because we're sort of naturally drawn to something warm that you sit with. So I wonder if coffee is sort of a substitute for the fires we used to have.
Yeah. I think that's a good parallel. I do wonder. So I read about these coffee shops from the 16th century and everything and how incredible they were, and people would just go there and spend the entire day talking and thinking and all this stuff. So I go to a coffee shop every weekday and usually at least once on the weekends. I'm there. That is a vital part of my ritual. But I'll get there and I mostly work. I might talk with, to the baristas a little bit here or there and say hi, but that's kind of it. And then I just work, and it's very rare that I'll talk to someone else unless I know them outside of that. I have some friends that I might see and I'll talk with them, but I'm not meeting people. I'm not walking up to somebody who's got their coffee and saying, "Hey, let's talk for 7 hours about, ideas for the future." That just doesn't happen. Everyone has their own thing to do. They're on their phone, they're on their laptop, And that's kind of it. Like, it's not just this mutual meeting space. And there is actually one interesting exception to that. It's a particular coffee shop uh, that I'll tell you about. But for the most part, it doesn't fill that role, at least in that way. And I wonder if that is just the nature of modern society, living in a big city, everybody's a stranger, that kind of thing. But I do wonder if there's something missing there from the modern. I don't think it's a coffee shop problem. I think it's a society problem. But
So I saw this blog post on Gurney Journey. Um, he and his wife had gone to a coffee shop and did some drawings or whatever. And then he says, we noticed this trend. In one Starbucks, we noticed 14 patrons. 11 of them were busy with laptops. 2 were holding phones. And 1 was a kid playing by himself quietly with an empty coffee cup. So if you compare that to the old, idea of the Parisian cafes with everyone just sitting there talking and hanging out, it's kind of haunting. 14 people and everyone's completely silent on their laptops or phones.
Yep.
I hadn't really thought of it that way, but if you consider coffee shops or places, public places where people actually have good conversations, if you consider that an important part of world culture, and then you consider nowadays where we don't talk anymore when we go to these places, that's kind of scary. I guess I hadn't really thought of it that way, but I don't know. Maybe we should start a coffee shop. No electronics allowed inside. And we encourage in-depth conversations, and we can all get smarter.
So there's a coffee shop that's near here. It's not quite in the neighborhood, but it's still pretty close. And it's a little bit different in that it's this big open space, and they have a handful of small tables kind of around the perimeter where 2 people could sit or something, but not a lot. They have this seating area that's basically 2 couches facing each other with a small table in between, like a little coffee table. So there's that area. And then the rest of it is these tables, and they're almost look like picnic tables. They don't have benches built in, but it's these longish tables, and you can sit 3 people comfortably on each side. So it's almost like a countertop looking type of thing. These long tables, 3 on each side. You could fit 4 if you wanted to. And there's a handful of these in the middle. So what happens is the small tables fill up pretty quickly, or people just tend to not really sit there. Most of the seating is either in this almost living room looking area, or it's at these tables where you're sitting 6 people. So normally, if you walked into a normal coffee shop with lots of seating and bar seating and everything, and then you have a handful of tables, nobody would sit with somebody else at a table. You could have 1 person at a 4-person table. You'd have to be a sociopath to sit down across from this person, unless maybe the entire coffee shop is full. Then you're like, hey, is it okay if I won't bother you, whatever? Like, it's that, right? It's this awkward social thing. And they're like, oh yeah, okay, it's fine. But at this place, everybody just sits at these tables because there's nowhere else to sit. And that's how the whole thing is built. Like, you're just expected to, because that's what's there. So usually you walk up to the table and you might kind of go, hey, is anybody sitting here? And everyone's like, oh yeah, no, right, it's fine. And half the time you're not even really doing that. You're just sitting. And everyone's still on their laptops. Everybody's still doing their thing. But because you're actually sitting in proximity with other people, many times it has happened where somebody will say something to somebody else. There's actually not a lot of chargers in the middle of the table. So sometimes you have to kind of negotiate, like, hey, if anybody needs this, or I'm pretty much full. Things like that, that'll kind of prompt a little bit of conversation. Yeah. But many times I've been there, and conversation will just kind of get started across the whole table with strangers, or maybe 2 people came together and everybody else is a stranger or something. But because of the way it's set up, because you're sitting there with other people in a way that feels very comfortable, you don't feel like you had to do something weird for this to happen. People will just start to kind of talk and like, oh, that's cool. What are you working on? I'm kind of interested in that. And I've had many conversations at this place, far, far more than any other coffee shop. And I don't even go there all that often, because there's something about the design of the physical space that puts you in a situation with other people in a way that feels very natural and comfortable. And you're not having to be a weirdo and like go If I'm sitting at a normal coffee shop and somebody sits at the table with me, I'm like, why would you do that? This person wants something, or they're probably a weirdo.
Right.
They're probably not a normal person, whatever that means, because it's very much counterculture. And so that's the assumption. It's like, hey, this person is sort of violating the norm. So there must be something odd about them. And I'm immediately on my guard. And I don't want to be that person either. But at a place where it's completely normalized, where just the space is designed to make it feel like the normal thing is to do that, you don't have any of that same suspicion. Somebody comes and sits with you at the table, you're like, that's fine, they're a normal person, and you're not like, you don't have any of that edginess of why are they doing this. So there's something really unique about this place, and it makes me feel like you totally could design places. I mean, you still have to contend with, people are mostly going to be on their laptops, me included. That's what I do. I bring it and I work. But you could facilitate this stuff. But I don't think it's something that gets thought about all that often. Like, it's almost incidental because of just the way this building is set up.
I have never thought about that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's interesting. I wish we could do this every week. I've always wanted to do a coffee drinking podcast.
Yeah.
I mean, I enjoy the beer, the drinks, doing a night podcast, but
I love coffee and I prefer it to alcohol, like in terms of its effects. So I would love to do a drinking coffee and doing podcast episode. That would actually be, we could make that a regular thing if you want to. But here, one last thing that I wanted to ask you about, or bring up at least. We talked about how coffee is wonderful and it helps you focus, and it's this ritualistic thing that makes you slow down and it brings you energy and you talk to people. And I mean, I adore it. I use it every single day. But are there downsides? Do you think there is a cost to some of that? So, for example, you take alcohol. If I drink alcohol, I feel good and it makes me more relaxed. Some people, have bad reactions with alcohol, or maybe it doesn't bring out the best in them. For me, at least at like a moderate level, I feel really good. I'm more relaxed. I'm less in my head. Usually I'm able to interact with people much more fluidly, social lubricant type of thing. That's very much the case for me. And if it were just that, I would say alcohol is amazing and I would drink it every night and just relax and have fun and talk to people. But the only reason I don't do that is that there is a pretty major cost in that if I have too much or even a moderate amount, I don't feel very good the next day. And I know that it makes me sleep worse. And I know that it's a poison, literally, that my liver is having to deal with. So it's just the cost of the alcohol that causes me to say, no, it's not quite as amazing as it seems at first. So my question is there a cost to caffeine and coffee?
yeah. Number one, it's expensive. And it just gets more and more expensive. You're paying $6 or $12 or however much for a cup of coffee. It should be 5 cents or something. But yeah, it's expensive. And that's really stupid. And if I added up how much money I've spent on coffee in my life, I don't want to ever see that number. Even if you're not buying it at an actual an actual place, you're just brewing it at home, still expensive. Coffee's expensive. So that's number one. Now, as far as like health stuff goes, if you start reading about, if you Google, is coffee good for you? The first one will be coffee's great for you. The second one will be coffee's killing you. And then the third one will be good again. And then it'll just back and forth. So who the hell knows? But for me personally, yes, there are definite downsides. One being that I need coffee. And if I don't get coffee, I feel awful. And I seem to reach some point of every day where I don't feel good, and it's because I need more coffee. So I imagine life without coffee would be maybe more consistent. I don't know if consistent is the right word. It would be less dramatic.
Yeah.
Being a coffee drinker, you're always getting the coffee, feeling good, and then not feeling so great, and then feeling good again when you whatever. It also, I have a tendency to drink it too late, which will keep me up at night, of course, and can potentially ruin the next day. So yeah, I mean, there's The downsides are nothing unless you go a full day or two without coffee. If you go a full day or two without coffee, God help you. So in terms of the day-to-day coffee downsides, it is nothing like a hard drug or something. You're not dealing with this huge come down and going through crazy withdrawals from day to day. It's just like, as long as you got your coffee during the day, you're fine. An hour or two might go by where you feel like you need another cup, but you're fine. So it's not like a dramatic addiction, and you're not getting some crazy high from coffee. It's just, oh,
Right.
cool, I got my coffee, this is nice. As far as the day-to-day goes, the downsides are not dramatic, really. The worst one probably is just maybe staying up too late, if you drink it too late in the day.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty big downside, I think. Also, okay, the other one is just becoming dehydrated, because coffee dehydrates you. You need to remember to drink more water. I do not always remember that, and so I will find myself being dehydrated pretty often.
So what I had said a minute ago or a while ago that I am thinking about cutting out coffee for a month or so. Still on the fence about that, mostly because I'm afraid to, because I'm addicted. But the reason why I have thought about doing that is I've been exercising quite a bit. Not a crazy amount by most standards, every day kind of thing. And the biggest factor, I feel like I'm making progress. I've been running, I've been lifting, and I've been making progress on both of those. The lifts are progressing, the running is progressing, but the problem is the recovery, where I feel like I can go out there and do a good workout and make some gains, make some progress, but then my heart rate just doesn't really come back down for a long time. It tends to stay elevated. I feel like I'm just overexerted, I wouldn't describe it as anxious, because I'm not necessarily mentally anxious and worried, but physically I feel anxious. I can just kind of feel my heart pounding, and it'll even go, into the evening and in the night, where I just feel like my body is revved up. And I'll track it with the Garmin watch. Looking at my resting heart rate is something I pay a lot of attention to. Basically, what does my heart rate look like overnight, and particularly in the morning when I wake up? And I want it to be low. If at the best of times it's like low 50s or even upper 40s, I'll wake up, my heart rate's like 50 beats per minute. But as I start to, if I get more active, doing exercise and whatnot, it'll go up to where it can be in the 60s in the mornings, or even 65 or something like that. So a good 15 beats per minute higher, which I'm not doing anything at those times. My body is just stressed and my heart is pounding, and I can feel it too. Like, I will feel that ramped up element to it. And I've experimented with different things, and I'll take time off of exercising, or add more rest times or whatever. And sometimes it'll improve, but it's something that persists over time. It's not like, I exercise really hard, the resting heart rate starts to rise. I can feel a lot of those feelings of just the revved up, sympathetic nervous system drive type of thing. And then if I cut that out, it takes a long time for it to come back down. And even this past time, I was in Florida, I was off for a week, didn't exercise at all. And it really didn't come back down. It just kind of lowered, but then stayed there. And I just still feel like kind of redlined a little bit. Anyway, my diet is very good as far as I can tell. I've been very consistent, at least, about sleep, although I do tend to wake up during the night pretty frequently. So that, I haven't been able to get past that. Like, consistent bedtime, consistent wake time, still kind of waking up during the night. So I'm wondering, like, hey, I've tried a lot of things. I've tried taking ashwagandha and more magnesium and all kinds of random stuff that is claimed to help. But part of me is thinking, I really wonder how much caffeine is contributing to this. Because
Probably a lot.
yeah, I wake up. So again, with the heart rate thing, sometimes, actually, this is fairly common. I'll wake up, resting heart rate is like low 60s. I, get up, I go somewhere, I sit down, I start working. I've, haven't started or just barely started drinking coffee, and my heart rate will actually drop. And sometimes it'll get down to considerably lower than it was when I was asleep. Like my body is more relaxed, even being awake and sitting there and typing at a computer than I was while I was sleeping. And then as I drink the coffee, it takes a while, a couple hours, but then it starts to ramp back up and then it's high and it's elevated for the rest of the day. And it's especially bad if I exercise. Not that anyone cares about my particular physiology or whatever, but I am wondering if coffee is a big part of this. And I'm afraid to find out the answer because I love coffee so much. I am scared that if I cut it out, this is going to be much better and I'll be recovering better. And then I'll have to think, cool, now I know that there's this cost behind caffeine and it's going to make me feel bad about the one last indulgence that I have in my life.
I have found as you get older, the answer is always cutting out something you love. Yep. So yeah, this will fix it. Get rid of the last thing that you care about, and that'll be your answer.
I hate everything.
Yeah, I'd say it's a good chance it's the coffee. Yeah, I mean, I would also like to try out no coffee and see what happens.
Do you want to do it?
I'm not ready to make that commitment yet. Okay,
Right.
we can talk about this more later.
I'm not either, but I know that I never
Yeah.
will if I just keep going. Yeah.
Maybe
One day.
sometime next year or something. But yeah, probably need to do it at some point just to see. I watched one of the videos on, people quitting coffee for 30 days or whatever. And this guy, one of the guys had quit for like 6 months or something. And he said, you kind of lose the withdrawals or whatever after 1 month. But he was really
1 month. Oh my God.
or you quit sort of craving it after a month or something. You get over the massive migraine headaches after the first, 3 or 4 days or something. But he was saying that he didn't really start to see a big improvement or change. He just felt kind of lazy for the first month or two. But after, he said, like 3 or 6 months, then everything started changing. And he was super gung-ho about it and said he was never going back to coffee. So if we're going to not do coffee at some point, I would like to not just do it for 30 days. It would have to be much longer. Or we would do more research, whatever. Okay. But I hate that every time we find something we love, it's like, okay, now let's get rid of it because there's a couple downsides to it.
I was thinking like 2 weeks, maybe a month, not half a year.
I think that might be the only way to give it a fair shot.
What I would have to do is probably drink decaf or something in the morning. Like there is just no way in hell that I am giving up the caffeine. Okay, I'm willing to accept that there might be a cost there and I'm afraid to find out if there is. But the ritual, the going to the coffee shop, sitting there and I can't, there's no way. I love that way too much. And I would just have to figure out a way of being able to do that. I mean, genuinely, that is a major part of what anchors me into a regular, productive, sane human routine. Like I get up and it's dark, and the only thing that really works there is just put some clothes on, get out the door, go sit at my favorite coffee shop, and then I'm good. Like I got my coffee, I can just chill, and I just ramp myself up that way.
Okay. Well, the reason why you're considering giving up the coffee is it because you care more about your gains? You love your gains more than your coffee experience every day?
It's not that. I mean, that might be part of it, but it feels like my body is stressed. And if I'm not doing anything, then it seems like it's pretty much fine. But if I'm exercising, my body feels overstressed. And I don't think that it's too much exercise. It's not.
Yeah.
I mean, I have been doing a lot, but even when I cut it down, it still feels like my body is just revved up and it won't calm down when it's supposed to. So it's kind of just showing me a problem or exacerbating a problem. Like I don't want
All right.
all the stress to my body to be coming from coffee that can't fill up 80% of my allostatic load of stress for my body, and then there's no room for anything else,
Yeah.
you know?
All right. Well, we're going to have to address this in the future, but for now, I'm going to keep enjoying my coffee.
I'm
But
not
yeah,
sure what I'm gonna do.
the giving up coffee challenge thing has sort of been on our list of things to try for a long time. So maybe sometime next year.
Okay. I'm still debating it. I might try it sooner. I really just want to know the answer.
So, in closing, how would you summarize coffee and close this out? I don't think we have like a big opinion on this or a big statement we're trying to make, other than coffee's great, does good things, also does bad things probably. But
Yeah. I love it. It's like one of the loves of my life. I swear I have had it every day for my entire adult life and almost all of my teenage life. I probably started drinking it at 14 or something, and it's like probably my favorite thing. But I am a little bit conflicted about it, and I'm wondering if there's a cost. So we'll have to see. So let us know, anyone out there, what your relationship is to coffee. Like, how much do you drink? What do you think about it? Do you think there is maybe a downside and it affects you, or do you think it's all good and everything's fine? But let us know. We'd love to hear it.